Please note that this meeting is being recorded. It won't be available for general viewing, but we do share a copy of the recording with members of the DACT project who weren't able to attend but would like to be able to see and hear what was happening today. This is our 23rd workshop, and today we have some speakers who will be talking about RISM integration with the Cantus database specifically. I am Jennifer Bain, and I'm at Dalhousie University in Halifax, and I'm the project director of DACT. The workshop will be led by Ichiro Fujinaga, so I'll talk about that a little bit later. But before we begin, I would just like to acknowledge that Dalhousie University operates in the unceded territories of the Mi'kmaq, Wolastoqey, and Passamaquoddy peoples. These sovereign nations hold inherent rights as the original peoples of these lands, and we each carry collective obligations under the peace and friendship treaties. Section 35 of the Constitution Act from 1982 recognizes and affirms Aboriginal and treaty rights in Canada. We also at Dalhousie recognize that African Nova Scotians are a distinct people whose histories, legacies, and contributions have enriched that part of Mi'kma'ki known as Nova Scotia for over 400 years. Our project, if you're not yet familiar with it, the Digital Analysis of Chant Transmission, which we refer to as DACT, is a collective project that aims to extend the study of the dissemination of plain chant from localized research, focused mostly on Europe and the Middle Ages, to global research tracing transmission to other continents through to the modern era. And to do this, we need digital tools. And today will be a great example of the kinds of things we're trying to do to make that research easier to do and richer. We are funded by a partnership grant from the Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council of Canada, with support also from Dalhousie University and the University of Waterloo, where the Cantus database was developed for many years and where the Cantus Index is maintained. And we are also supported through the Digital Research Alliance of Canada that hosts the Cantus database. For those of you who are partner representatives of the partner organizations for the DACT project, SSHRC requires an annual confirmation of your contributions to the partnership, and you will have all received a general email and then specific emails to each of you with a statement confirming your contributions for last year. We would ask that you please have it signed and return it to us by April 17th. Earlier is fine too. But because we need to prepare these things and prepare a kind of composite report to send on to SSHRC. In the fall, we'd like to have a DACT team updates workshop. We'll see how we'll structure that depending on how many people want to participate. So it might be sort of short lightning presentations or some longer things. But please just keep that in mind as you work with your students over the summer and attend conferences and you're preparing written materials, because we'd love to hear what people have been doing. For everyone involved in DACT, as well as those using our shared digital tools, the Cantus database and the Cantus Index, we would also really like to hear your news about your publications and presentations, which we collect for various kinds of reporting. We have a Google form, and I think will we send around the slides, or maybe Deborah, you can put that link in the chat for people that they can use to report their work. It'll also help us. We're trying to gather this annually, but it will help us as well for our midterm report of the DACT project in the fall of 2026. And if you haven't heard yet, we have a DACT app, and you can use this QR code if you'd like to download it. We have links to many associated websites and databases, and also it features our sound walks. We will be doing a few couple more sound walks this spring. Our Chant Out Loud team has been working on this. One will be at the International Congress on Medieval Studies in Kalamazoo, Michigan, which will be very fun. And we're doing a kind of a launch session on the Thursday to encourage people to participate in that. And also, we're doing another one with the Canadian Society of Medievalists in Waterloo, Ontario. Deborah and I will also be at MedRen in Durham and Newcastle upon Tyne. We're doing a joint uh, poster presentation there on the DACT project. And then also, I'm doing a paper on other research. So it'll be fun to see whoever is there as well. So don't hesitate to get in touch. Our website, in case you haven't seen that yet. And I think I'll stop sharing there. And so I'm now going to turn things over to Ichiro Fujinaga at McGill University, who is going to chair the remainder of the workshop. And he will introduce Andrew Hankinson and Dylan Hillerbrand, who will be presenting for us today on the work that made this RISM Cantus database integration happen. We'll see a bit of the behind the scenes work that was involved. So I shall turn things over to you, Ichiro. Thank you.
Thank you, Jennifer. My name is Ichiro Fujinaga, and I'm at McGill University in what's called the music technology area. And I established a lab called Distributed Digital Music Archives and Libraries Lab, DDMAL. And now it's over 22 years or something ago. And many people have worked in this lab, including Andrew and Dylan, who I'll talk about. But also you may have heard of Laurent Pougin, who also is the co-director at the RISM Digital. And what we'll be doing is just basically support sort of technology for music librarians and musicologists or music researchers. So that's where we are. We now have also a partnership grant called Linked Music, one word, and we're doing sort of integrating different music databases into one place. Okay, so I'm very happy to introduce probably two of the most talented software developers in the music world, uh, Andrew Hankinson, Dylan Hillebrand. So Andrew and I go way back. I think my first email I found was from 2007. So that's what, over 18 years ago. So he first worked in our lab. Well, he took a seminar with me back then. Then when he was trying to finish his master's degree to be a music librarian, and I convinced him to do some more graduate work, and he came and got his PhD in our lab. And his first major work, and he's done many things while he was at the lab and since, as you will hear. But his first big project was the Liber Usualis site. So almost everything on there was coordinated, and the software is written by Andrew, and it's still running. It's one of the longest running web app or web databases, not as long as Cantus database, but apparently it's quite successful. When that was done, I wanted to do something bigger, and that led to Salzin's manuscript digitization, and Andrew was also involved in that. One of the things that we didn't know what to do at that point, so this is over 10 years ago, is how to get these high resolution manuscript images. And luckily, Andrew introduced us to just a technology that was just coming into being, which was called IIIF. I hope everybody or most of you heard about IIIF, which allowed us to display the images on the screen and efficiently. And so that was a big help. And actually, Andrew have contributed to the development of IIIF as well. Then for his PhD, because he had this horrible experience doing Libre Visualis, it was a lot of work, and he wanted to um, streamline the workflow. So that basically became his PhD work, and it is now known as Rodan, which is the software we now use to do the optical music recognition at our lab. Uh, then after that, he went on to Oxford at the Bodleian Library. He also worked for Julia Craig McFeely's DIAM project, and I think he still does. Then finally, he went work with Laurent and created this RISM Digital. I hope I covered his main points. And Dylan's more new. We usually the lab hires summer students. They're usually undergraduates from computing science or electrical engineering or software engineering. But 2 years ago, in 2003, uh, we had an applicant from from a master's student, and not only was he a master's student, he was from music. So we have this extensive interview process, and turns out Dylan is a extremely talented programmer, developer, and it turned out he got his bachelor's at Swarthmore with a math degree, but then he came to McGill to be a singer. And I heard him sing. He's a countertenor, a beautiful voice. And so we have uh, a singer who is also a developer, and we've been lucky to have him. He's basically been overlooking all the other developers in our lab for the last 2 years, and it's been very, very valuable. Uh, and hopefully he'll continue working with us. In fact, it was so good that basically Jennifer and Deborah sort of I'm not going to say they didn't completely take him away, but he's now working half time for DACT and also for our lab. All right, so I'll finish the introduction and I'll let Andrew and Dylan take over and give us the report.
Hi, everybody. Thank you, Itch, for the introduction. I think it must have been earlier than 2007 because I took your seminar in 2006. So it'd be even earlier. Um, okay, so we're here to talk about a project that we worked on for the last year to integrate RISM online and our RISM database with Cantus. And I'm going to lead you through first a few reasons why we wanted to do this. And then we'll go on to the details of how we did it. So I go to conferences, and when I talk to musicologists, a lot of times they come to me and say, "I looked, but I couldn't find it in RISM." And what they mean, of course, is that they couldn't find it in the online RISM database, which has been hosted by the Bayerische Staatsbibliothek since 2010, and now we have our own online way of searching it. But people who have sort of grown up with the books in RISM, and a lot of you I know the blue books that have sat on the reference shelves for many, many, many years. You've come to see RISM as sort of an authority for a wide variety of musical literature and musical sources. Um, and when they go to the database, they can't figure out why they can't find it. So, so of course, that means that we have to talk about the problem of when is something in RISM but not in RISM. And this is hopefully for this community, this will help clarify a few things. I've put together a handy table of on this table lists all of the RISM books that we've published. And you can see that we've published a lot. I mean, there's 6 volumes of some of these. So there's a lot of books, 14 volumes of A1, et cetera, et cetera. And then on the right-hand side, you can see the red means it's not online. The yellow means it's some of it's online, but you can see it's qualified with a very small number. And green means it's fully online. And you can see here that of the things that are in RISM, the books that you would have consulted, very, very few of them have actually made their way into the online databases, and this is a problem because it has created sort of a disconnect between people who think if they go to the RISM databases, they should be able to find the same things that they find in the books. But that's not completely true. It's not true at all, in fact. Um, so, um, so our users expect to find everything in RISM, but we don't have it. And so what are the solutions to this problem? The first solution is, of course, we retroconvert all RISM books. And this is a lot of time and a lot of money. And we have neither. So this isn't really a viable solution. We do as much as we can, but it would be a many, many, many decades thing, because a lot of times we don't even have like Word files. So it would be OCR scanning the books and then converting them to records and then converting that into sort of structured records, and then cleaning up the data. It would just be a real big mess. So solution B is to partner with other projects that do a lot of this better and that are more up to date than the books, in fact, so that our users can come to RISM, find the things that they expect, and then go off to these other projects that really do a better job of indexing and describing these sources. Um, And so when we started RISM Online, one of the major goals of this project was to work with external projects in integrating their data with RISM data so that we can provide ways of kind of letting people know where to find information about sources that they might not otherwise know where to find. So RISM Online is a project that we develop at the RISM Digital Center here in Bern, Switzerland. We launched it in 2022. And as well as all of the RISM source records, so the books that we just the library books, the sources. We also publish information about people and institutions, so our authority records, and we have a really fun Incipit search, so you can search by music notation, and so on and so forth. So this is a platform that we use to kind of experiment, but also deliver data to people. to our users. In 2024, we started with DIAM. So we aligned and presented the DIAM data in RISM Online. This was our first big database. We aligned and indexed the DIAM sources, people, organizations, and institutions. Critically, the way that we do this is not an import. So we don't import and take the records. We directly get the data from DIAM, and then we index it in RISM Online, but we always point back to the website. So in this case, if you find a DIAM record, you are directed back to the DIAM website. You're not sort of kept, we don't keep you in RISM. And this means that every week we get new data from DIAM. So the editors of DIAM update their records, and we then don't have to then update it in RISM. We just get the new stuff from them. And going back to that table that I showed earlier, in fact, DIAM was the only place that you could go to get the RISM B4 material, which is manuscripts of polyphony. And of course, those books are getting on to be 30 or 40 years old, so a bit older even. And there's, of course, new sources in that we've discovered that were never in the books. So you get new data from DIAM. So it's even better than having the books in some ways. So what attracted us to Cantus, and why did we want to do this? Well, apart from the sort of personal connections that we've had through Itch and through the Solzins and Liber Usualis projects, the current coverage of chant sources in RISM is very low. And so we saw this as an opportunity to fill a lot of gaps. People come to RISM expecting to find music, and a chant is, of course, music. So we would like to not just send them away empty-handed. But also there's a kind of conceptual overlap. So a Cantus source is approximately the same thing as a RISM source. And no weird kind of intellectual transformations are needed to map one to another. And when you're talking about data and data alignment, having a sort of intellectual alignment is kind of the first critical step of aligning databases. If you're talking about, if you're trying to align apples and oranges, you don't come up with an apple orange. You have to make an orange an apple or an apple an orange. And that was kind of sort of a nice tick that we could say, yeah, we don't have to do much work here. And also for Cantus, of course, the cataloging standard is very high. There's proofreading, there's all the work that goes into publishing a source online. This is authoritative data, and it's something that we would be happy to present. It's not just sort of a fly-by-night sort of organization. So we got together in April 2024, and we had a meeting in Halifax at the DACT launch, I think it was. And we identified, out of that meeting, we identified 2 changes to Cantus database to help support integration with RISM. Just 2 changes. That was all that was needed. So we needed to align the data. So we identified a few things where Cantus was duplicating, identifying material, and where the RISM siglum might not have matched the holding institutions. In this case, you can see the record. We had a title. The title was the full name of the library, but the siglum had the RISM siglum. And this caused a little bit of a problem because we had inconsistent sort of holding institution information and inconsistent identifications of sources. So this was one way that we sort of identified a problem. And multiple sources in the same institution were not actually related to in the database. They were, we just had a list of sources, and these sources were were just listed one after another. And so two sources in the same library weren't necessarily connected through the library. They were just named the same. So this was a problem that we were going to need to address. So the first proposal was that we wanted to add an institution table to Cantus. So we needed a way of sort of giving a data object to the institutions that held the sources. This was aligned through the RISM institution, the RISM siglum. Um, and if you don't know about the RISM siglum, it's a short code for identifying organizations that uh, have holdings or somehow noteworthy. Usually has it always had a country and then a city and then an institution component. And this was a nice place to align the two because we could align the organizations and then the sources would come from that. And then the second bit of information that we needed to do was to add sort of an external authorities identifiers to Cantus sources. And that meant that once we identified um, uh, a match in an external database, we could store that match, that identifier in the external database in Cantus, and then make the link back. And what that meant, so in the example here, we have two entries. The first one is institutions 30003846, and that points to an institution record in RISM Online. The other one is archives 520, and that points to an archive record in DIAM. These are both in Cantus, so now we've linked those three together. So we know in any one of those databases that these things are equivalent. I think this is the National Library of South Africa, if I'm not mistaken. So this is just a brief overview of what that might look like. So you have an institution record. So this would be St. Mary's in Halifax. The siglum is used to align them initially. Then we can, once we've sort of got, because we already have this information in Cantus and RISM. So once we say, okay, well, Cantus has this and RISM has this, now we can figure out what their identifiers are in each. And then we then need to figure out what the sources are that are attached to that institution record in Cantus. But by sort of transitive relationships, once we figure out that, then we know in RISM what sources are held in Cantus through that relationship. So once we have the RISM and Cantus alignment, then we can say, oh, well, this source is in St. Mary's and show that in RISM Online. And then from there, we have in Cantus, we would have a relationship on a source record to that holding institution, that institution record, and then the shelf mark, which is the identifier for that source, you would combine it. You could then combine it all together and get some sort of display like you see in the lower right, which is Halifax, Canada, St. Mary's University, Patrick Power Library, and then the shelf mark. And all of that sort of gets combined from all of the different relationships. So we don't have a single place where all of that information is defined, we can build that identifier from all of the different relationships that we have. So simple, right? That's totally simple. Then sometime in September, Deborah sends an email with a request for a meeting, and has helpfully counted up how many emails we've sent about this topic, which was at that point getting on to 128 emails plus, I would imagine. I think there was a few that didn't get counted. Um, and and it just kept going back and forth and back and forth because we sort of really needed to figure out there is more things to figure out than actually seem to be than we actually had figured in that initial meeting in April. And so I think all of us kind of felt like this, I asked ChatGPT to sort of give me a conceptual rendering of what we felt like at this point. And I think it got it pretty close. I think all of the question marks and all of the people just sort of staring blankly at their computer screens meant that we needed to sort of now come down and sit together and figure something else out. So we had this meeting, and then we sort of came up with a few solutions, and I think Dylan will now take us through the problems and the solutions that we identified.
Yes, thanks, Andrew, and good to be here with you all. So yeah, I think that Chat GPT depiction of our collective inboxes and brains and is very apt. And the reasons for that there are a couple of different reasons for that. And starting with terminology. So obviously, as Andrew mentioned earlier, the RISM siglum is this term used for this series of letters and dashes that is used to identify a particular institution, archive, library, a place where that holds various sources. And so, sometimes when we say siglum or RISM siglum, that's what we mean. And then also historically, Cantus database had this other field being displayed on all of our sources that we also called the siglum. And the Cantus database siglum had the RISM siglum in it, but it also had the shelf mark, and it also had a bunch of other identifying information in it. So we sort of had these two different sigla that were both used to identify different things. In the RISM case, it was used to identify institutions, and in the Cantus database case, it was used to identify specific sources. But there was also overlap because the Cantus database siglum often had a RISM siglum or something that looked like a RISM siglum in it. And so there was a lot of terminological confusion as part of this integration process. And how are we clear internally what we're talking about when we're talking about a siglum, but also when we're done with this process, how do we make sure that users of Cantus database who are potentially going to RISM and then coming back to Cantus database, how do we make sure that they understand which siglum we're talking about and don't get confused by these different uses of the word siglum? Another issue was what to do about what we've called quote unquote private institutions. And so you'll have a lot of sources in Cantus database that are held by big institutional archives or libraries. So, the Bodleian, the National Library of France, the Patrick Power Library at St. Mary's. But then we also have a lot of an increasing number of sources, in particular fragments, that are held by some person who bought one folio at an antique market and framed it and put it on their wall, but then have sent it into the DACT fragment project. And we also want to have that in Cantus database. And so what do we do about those institutions or those holding entities that are just a private owner. And so the questions become, okay, do we want every private collector to have to get a RISM siglum? RISM will give you a siglum. I think Deborah has her own RISM siglum, but it has your name in it, it has your location in it, and so for a variety of reasons, an individual collector might not want a RISM siglum to be out there on the web and connect them to a specific source. And also then, we have to think about the poor people over at RISM who otherwise we'd be emailing, once or twice a week saying, oh, can you give us a RISM siglum for Jennifer? And can you give us a RISM siglum for Ichiro? And that quickly becomes a lot of work. So we need to figure out a way to represent those collections in Cantus database without some of those problems. And related to that, if someone comes to Cantus database and finds a source and says, oh, there's a chant in the source, I'd like to consult the source, and it's held by a private collector, we had to think about how do we want to make that location information available? Do we want to put it publicly on the web? Do we want to have some other system for dealing with it? Related to this problem of the sigla is that historically, for these private collections, Cantus database had made up RISM-like sigla. So here's an example. This CDN-watt on PC was a siglum that was, I believe, again, Deborah's siglum, but that was Deborah's fake RISM siglum, as we call it, or we were calling it as part of this process. So that was a siglum that Cantus database made up for Deborah's private collection, but even though it looks like a RISM siglum, it has the same, country marker CDN for Canada. It has a dash. It then has some grouping of letters here, WAT for Waterloo, Ontario, that signifies the city within the country. So even though it looks like a RISM siglum and is sort of doing similar things to RISM siglum, it's not a RISM siglum. RISM has no idea about this siglum, and so we can't use it to do the connection between institutions that Andrew was speaking about earlier, because RISM doesn't know about it. So we realized we kind of needed to be more strict about only using RISM sigla for when we were talking about RISM sigla and institutional sigla, and not using Cantus database, these RISM-like fake RISM sigla as well. Another problem was having to do, again, with private collections and shelf marks. So when you're dealing with an institutional collection, obviously shelf mark comes from where the source is on the shelf. But if we're talking again about this folio leaf that someone has bought and framed on their wall, what does a shelf mark mean? Does that source have a shelf mark in that private collection? And how do we represent that in the Cantus database? Another thing we had to think about were cases where we had various different identifiers for a Cantus, for a source in Cantus database. So in the Cantus siglum, before this integration process, we had been storing a lot of information in that siglum. So we were storing things like the reason codex, so a colloquial name, as we called it, for a specific source, not a shelf mark, but another way that the source was often referred to, and we would store that in the siglum. Things like OLIM numbers, previous shelf marks, and other identifiers were all being stored in this one field. And if we were trying to do this integration with RISM, we realized that we couldn't store all of this different information in a single field and still be able to integrate well. And then finally, with prints, there are, I think, 4 or 5 prints currently, print sources currently in Cantus database. And in that case, we have the issue of there are multiple copies. Those multiple copies may be held by multiple different institutions. How do we represent that institutional source relationship, both in Cantus database and in RISM for print sources? And then our last problem, again, with fragments is we were, in the Cantus siglum, we were storing that a particular source was a fragment versus a whole source. Again, a case where we were storing lots of different information in that one field that was causing complication for integration. So we needed to figure out how would we store information about whether the source was a full source or a fragment outside of that siglum. So this is another ChatGPT visualization, but it's what we felt like after we had this meeting where we solved all these problems. So we're in alignment. We're standing around looking at our masterwork of data integration in the center there. And here's why: because we came up with solutions to all of these problems. And the first solution was to create options for various private holding institutions in Cantus database. So whereas our original proposal had been to say, okay, if you have a holding institution in Cantus database, it has a RISM siglum, and it has to have a RISM siglum because that's how we're going to do this connection. We loosened that up a little bit and sort of recognized that there would be three different types of institutions in Cantus database. The first were institutional collections that did have RISM sigla. The second were individual collections that had RISM sigla. So these are private collectors who decide to get a RISM siglum. And then there are going to be individual collections that don't have a RISM siglum. And so RISM points to a Cantus database record for private sources. So you can still find these private sources in RISM online, and you can get from there to the Cantus database record. But we don't require that those institutions themselves have a siglum. So when we're creating these institutional records in Cantus database, we can mark that they're a private collection. Those will display a certain way to the user and don't require a RISM siglum. And we also decided that way we could, on the back end, store the contact information for these private collectors. So if someone comes to Cantus database or RISM online and finds a source held by a private collector, they can get in touch with Deborah or Jennifer, and Deborah and Jennifer can then work out whether or not a connection should be made between the private collector and the person interested. We also decided that digital reconstructions, which are something we're putting on, we have two of on Cantus database, where we take multiple different fragments and put them together as they might have been in the original source. Those also, because they're coming from fragments being held in multiple different places, would not require a holding institution. So in our original proposal, we had thought, okay, every source is going to have a holding institution, and we realized that these digital reconstructions would serve as an exception to that, and we made it possible to do that on the back end. In terms of prints, we decided that we would identify printed source records with the specific copy, holding and shelf mark, used to make the Cantus database inventory. So although a printed source in Cantus database, there will be multiple copies of that source hanging around, we usually know, or I think we know completely, or for every printed source, which specific copy was consulted to make the inventory in Cantus database. And we decided that that specific copy would be the one that we reference with the institutional siglum and shelf mark. Another big part of this project was making the decision to standardize the Cantus siglum. So first, refer to it as the Cantus siglum as opposed to the RISM siglum, which remember is the institutional identifier, but the Cantus siglum, which is the source identifier, we would refer to it everywhere on Cantus database as the Cantus siglum. We decided that only RISM siglum should look like RISM siglum. So if you'll remember this fake RISM siglum that we had previously given to Deborah's collection, we decided no more of that because it looks too much like a RISM siglum that someone coming to Cantus database would think they could go find it in RISM when they can't. So we're getting rid of those. Private collectors can have an official RISM siglum assigned. So this is Deborah's official RISM siglum. And so rather than that fake RISM siglum in the second paragraph, we're going to use only the official RISM siglum in the third paragraph there. But some private collectors, as I said before, should remain private, so won't have a RISM entry, and we decided that those sources or those sources held by holding institutions without a RISM siglum would just have Cantus as the siglum. So you would know, seeing that in a publication, that if you wanted more information about this source, Cantus would be the place to go rather than a specific archive, collection, or library. Oops. So here's a sort of visualization of that fact. Usually the Cantus siglum was the RISM siglum of the holding institution plus the shelf mark when source was in a private collection and therefore didn't have what we might traditionally refer to as a shelf mark, i.e. a place on the shelf, or in the library catalog, we would give it the DACT ID. So all of the sources in Cantus, or many of the sources in Cantus database, already had this DACT ID floating around, and we weren't really using it for anything, but we decided that, this would be a perfect place to use the DACT ID, was in referring to these sources that didn't have a shelf mark. And then, as I just mentioned, we used Cantus, just the word Cantus, in place of a RISM siglum where needed. So at the bottom here, you can see an example of each of those three different types of sources and their Cantus siglums. So the source on the left, the Salzines manuscript, has an official or a RISM siglum and a shelf mark assigned to it by the Patrick Power Library. In the center, this is Deborah's fragment. You see Deborah's RISM siglum plus the DACT ID for that source, because it doesn't have its shelf mark assigned by Deborah. And then on the source, the last source over there on the right, this is a private source in a private collection that doesn't have a RISM siglum, so we just have Cantus, and then also doesn't have a shelf mark assigned by the collector, and so we give it the DACT ID. And the final thing that we decided to do was, if you'll remember, I said earlier, one of the problems was we were storing all of this different information, previous identifiers, colloquial names or colloquial ways that people were referring to the sources, and previous shelf marks, all in this siglum field. And we decided, okay, that we don't need to store all of that information in a single field. We can break that out and store that in different fields. And that's actually will allow us to present it in a more informative way to users. So we split out separate fields for whether or not a source was a fragment or a complete source. We split out a separate field that allowed us to give a source various different colloquial names. And then we also split out a whole separate table that allowed us to refer to a single source with multiple different identifiers. And you saw an example of that earlier when Andrew was talking about the source identifier table. But this allows us to have previous identifiers, OLAN numbers, and the like, all reference or all connected to a single source without muddying up this Cantus siglum field. So I'll pass it back now to Andrew to talk a little bit more about the specific technical integration work.
So in a nutshell, it just required writing a lot of Python. And Python is the programming language. Basically what we had to do is take the data that was in Cantus and transform it into the new regime, which meant parsing a lot of text and figuring out how to change things but not lose things. And that's always the hard part in any sort of data migration, is how do you change it without losing it? So the first sort of step zero in all of this was to go through and standardize a lot of the data and standardize a lot of the names, and come up with sort of nice clean data so that you could parse it reliably without sort of losing things in the shuffle. I give an example here. So in the sort of uncontrolled past of the Cantus database in the name field, there were at least this many ways of describing the Bibliothèque Nationale in France. Of course, we needed to sort of standardize that in order to make that a clear identifier and a clear name for an institution. So that was one of the things that we needed to do. Um, the as part of this, we impose a what we call a source name regime, and this was kind of a temporary where once we cleaned up the data, we needed to keep everything in that clean state. And this persisted for a few months. But because Cantus is an operational database and people are changing things, we needed to sort of constantly go back and refresh and change and make sure that new records being added sort of conform to this while we were sort of mid-flight, mid-transition. Um, we wrote some custom migration scripts. They're still in the repository if you were really interested in looking at it. But our workflow is basically write something, run it, view the output, modify the data or modify the script, and repeat until there are no more errors. I mean, that's kind of programming in a nutshell. Um, there were at least two versions of the migration script, one that I wrote and then I got frustrated with, so I rewrote it. And so it, took quite a bit of effort to make sure that things were operating correctly. And then no errors is not really correct because we still needed to manually deal with things like Gottschalk. There's an entry called Gottschalk that was always coming up as a problem for me because there's no way to square that circle. So we just sort of skipped it and dealt with it manually. Um, but while we were in there, we did a whole bunch of other stuff that sort of helped make the Cantus website function better. So a lot of database lookups were optimized. We cleaned up the templating systems and we formatted things consistently, improved the search, and yada, yada, yada. So while we were just integrating these two databases, the overall effect was pretty big. One page in particular, I think we got from, I think it was triggering like 1,000 SQL queries when you were loading it, and we got it down to 9. So I think that's a pretty good uh, effort. I show this because so this is in GitHub. This is a pull request. It means that I'm trying to introduce new code to to the Cantus project. It's showing that I made this conversation had 39 posts, 60 commits, and changed 80 files. And this was just one of the several pull requests that I filed for this project. Um, so we went live. So spoiler, it worked. We went live in October 2024. There are now 555 new chant sources in RISM Online, which seems like both a big amount and a small amount. I mean, there were basically zero before, so 500 plus is pretty good now. And moreover, because of this work that we did with integrating the institutions, now when you go to a library like the British Library in RISM Online, you can see the Cantus records that are available in RISM, so to speak. And I'll show you a demo of that in a moment. A lot of the data that we have in Cantus is now corrected. So they're updated. They're now sort of presented correctly. And any new institutions that we had that didn't have RISM Sigla, we asked our colleagues in Frankfurt to assign a new one, and they did. No problem. So a lot of institutions now have a bit more recognition. If they're only sort of specialized in chant, then they have a official RISM presence now. Um, and just like with DIAM, This isn't an import, this is live. So every week we pull in the data from Cantus, and that means that any new records that have been published in Cantus make it into RISM as it goes. So we will get updated data uh, as long as this link exists. So with that, I'd like to show you a quick demo. And I hope you can see my browser screen here.
We can see it.
Great. So the first thing, just to show you how this works, if I do, this is RISM Online. I won't go through it because we don't have time, but if I do a search for antiphonor and click search, you can see that now when we find a result, say in Cantus or even in Diam, they're indicated with a little logo so you know where they're coming from. So this first result is a RISM record. This one is a Cantus record. This one's a Diam record. And they're sort of integrated as you go through the results. So just to show you the impact of this, we can turn off the Diam records and we can turn off the Cantus records. And we have 5 results in RISM for the word antiphonor without these 2 databases, and now we have 169. So I think that's a pretty significant improvement for our users. Like I said, these are not imports, and we try to direct people back to the database. So if you click on a result and you go see its preview, the record that you're directed to is in Cantus database. So if I click on this, it takes me off to Cantus database and shows me the data here. And so on and so forth. Same with the Diam institution results as well. So I think this helps people sort of go get authoritative information when they can. And the second thing, just to quickly show you, is the integrated holdings. So if I look for the University of Utrecht institution record in RISM Online, I'll get one result. So here's our institution record for the university library. And you can see that attached to this library, we have 89 sources. If I click on that, then I can see that this institution has results that are coming from Diam and also coming from Cantus. Again, if I hide those, we have 73 results, but if I display them, now we're up to 89. So this particular addition has helped improve what people can find in this particular institution database. So that's just a quick demo of this integration. And I don't know if we were going to do a little demo of the Cantus database, but I'm not sure if we have time itch. So yeah, if not, then yeah. Anyway.
Well, if there's time left, so we're a little into the discussion portion of this. So if there's time left, you can do the Cantus demo.
Okay, great. Yeah.
So are you guys done for the main part?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. I'm just, I can stop my sharing and maybe Dylan, you can put up the thank you slide and
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you slide.
Great.
All right. Thank you.
So thank you very
Yeah.
much.
Yeah. Thank
And
you.
yeah, it was a pleasure to present.
Great. So we have about 20 minutes. We'll take questions.
Dylan, Dylan, do you want to stop sharing so that everybody can see each other? It usually helps a bit. There we go.
Yeah. May I?
Sure.
Well, congratulations. This is great. I think everyone gains from this integration effort. I have two questions. First, who paid this job? And the second, if you would be interested in RISM to do a similar thing for the Portuguese Early Music Database, which has already a list of RISM sigla archives.
Do you want me to answer about who paid? It's sort of a combination. So DACT, as part of the partnership, had a link with RISM. So RISM is one of our partners, and McGill is also one of our partners. So the I think DACT sends a little bit of money every year to RISM, but RISM, it's possible that when RISM agreed to do this, when Laurent agreed that this could happen with RISM, we didn't think it was going to be quite the scale of job that it ended up being. But RISM pays Andrew's salary, and so the work that Andrew did was covered by RISM. The Dylan is paid through DACT and through DDMAL, so his time was covered that way, and any other work that was happening. I don't know, Dylan, if Lucas or other people were involved in some of this work. So it was yeah, so it was supported financially in a distributed manner. Let's put it that way.
Okay.
I'll just add that internally we considered it also to align with the linked music project because we were linking a lot of databases together, and it's good data for us to have. We also put it we also sort of conceptually put it under the linked music umbrella for our work as well. In terms of importing versus linking, it really has to depend, like I said, on the intellectual connection and the quality of data. Those are two criteria that I think are really important because we need to be able to verify and justify what we're just displaying. And like I said, with Cantus, we knew what we were doing. I should also mention here that in Cantus, we don't display and we don't present any unpublished sources. So anything that goes into RISM Online is only published sources from Cantus, and that means they've been proofread. That means that they've gone through an editorial process, and so on and so forth. So for that, we're pretty sure of the quality of the data. We also have internally with RISM, we have also we kind of deal with it on a case-by-case basis, whether we do this sort of integration through RISM Online or whether we take and import the data into MuseCat and make it into a thing. So the answer to your question in that roundabout way is it depends. We would need to sit down and look at all of these factors and see if it aligns with our goals and our methods, and whether somebody can pay for it. So, there's always the bottom line.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much, and congratulations.
Another question? Speak up. While you think
Yes.
I have
Sorry,
yeah.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
Yeah. No, go ahead.
Okay, hello everyone. I'm Virginia Blanton, and this is a really, really very exciting and timely, particularly for the team that I lead, the Cantarales project, as we are thinking about a number of sources that are not published, but they're going to be sources, excuse me, that will be listed. So yes, I had the same question about how will sources in the index eventually perhaps be part of this partnership in some way. So Manuel's question is there. But then also these individual projects that are part of the Cantus dropdown, when we add these sources, and in my case, the group that we're working on in Cantarales, we are not, these will not be inventoried sources. They will be a list of unpublished sources. And so this will be my question is how and where will we make some of these sources perhaps visible in both RISM and in Cantus, or will that particular set of projects remain a Cantus only?
Dylan, that sounds like maybe your
Yeah,
area.
yeah. So I think the hope is that they could, and the goal is that they would, as Andrew's saying, because this is, the catalog that we give essentially that we give to RISM on a weekly basis automatically, and that then is indexed by RISM. Um, as we make changes to the Canvas database, will be reflected in RISM Online, and all of these sub databases, you might say, of Canvas database, Cantarales included, would be part of that. To go back to Andrew's point about the intellectual alignment, all of the inventories, the Cantus database inventories, so all of the chant material that has been inventoried in some cases, or in the case of Cantarales, as you're saying, won't be, will not be, they won't have chant inventories in Cantus database. But all of that happens through the source, and then the source is connected to RISM through the holding institution. So it doesn't matter from the perspective of this integration with RISM whether or not there's any sort of specific chant inventories for those sources. So under the hood, a source in Cantarales is the same thing as a source in the Canadian chant database, as in the regular, as in the Calvin Bauer sequence database. So once the record of the source is, so the bibliographic information, the summary, the provenance, all of that all of that or none of that, however much the Cantarales project decides is important before it's visible to the general public. But once you decide it's visible to the general public, it will be included in this export.
Fantastic. Thank you, Dylan. That's great.
I know Lucero had her hand up, but Jennifer, was this your comment related
Yeah.
to what Dylan just said, or
Yeah.
Virginia's?
Yeah. In relation to that, just that we've been talking a lot about proofreading and where the check marks will be and which parts are proofread, and sort of separating out the different elements, like proofreading the inventory, but there's also proofreading the source description. So once the source description is proofread, then it can be published. So even if there's no inventory, the status of the source itself could be published on the Cantus database. And once it's published, then it will just automatically go to RISM.
Great. Lucero.
Yes, hello. I have a question. I don't know if it's a question for the reflection. I'm not quite sure. We have been in RISM with the Music Catalog of the Cathedral of Mexico already. We have signed an agreement between the University of Mexico and RISM. So I think about 2,000 and something records have been cropped in RISM. And there is something we tried to sustain there, that was a field that you can get inside our own record, because our images are more beautiful than to use from RISM because we have syllable every inch of it. So, and Laurent made a beautiful job. So our inches could be translated. That's one thing. So we are in RISM via the music catalog. And then RISM conceives the work as a whole, not as items. On the other hand, we are working with Deborah and with DACT in order that our cantorals, our chant books, come into with an ID in cantos. So we intend to have 4 books complete, at least 3 of them, with every item with ID in cantos. But we have not dealt, actually, Deborah, with the book as a whole, yes? That would be the not the database, but the cantos index, I think. No? So we are going to prepare these 4 books with all the review we do, with all the things we do, but as a whole, not as items, but the book as a whole. That would be a matter for RISM, I think. I don't know exactly how we will do that connection, and I think that's something either we have or both we have to discuss with Deborah on one side, and I don't know with Jennifer Ward in RISM, with her we deal everything about the music catalog. So I don't know. It's a question for Deborah, I think. First comes the datus to be in the map of Cantus database with these items. We are preparing of 4 books, and on the other side, the books of the whole. That would be the Cantus index. Am I right, Deborah?
And because of the 2 sites that we have, Cantus Index being the catalog, and the hub, that's the federated search, and then the Cantus database being the thing we're talking about today, because of the name being similar, I think we want to make very clear which one we're talking about. So that hub is where those individual chants will be connected with the Cantus ID, and the RISM part is not actually connected through there. It's only connected through the Cantus database. But one of the things we would like, it's maybe on our wish list, is that Cantus Index hub site also will deal with a hub of source information, not just an individual chant. Right now, you go to the Cantus Index and you can only search for individual chants, and the Cantus ID comes up. It lists sources in the other databases, but there is not currently a way to search for sources in that Cantus Index hub. But that doesn't seem that complicated to me. I mean, I'm not a programmer, so maybe it is. But because the because the information's being like brought in from the other networked sites and they all have Sigla, I would think you could collect sources there also, not just chants. So we're dealing with 2 levels here. One is the level of the source where everything's in there, and that would be a record that would give you date, provenance, type of book, and all that kind of thing. And the other level is the chant level, and that's what we currently collect there. So if we were to do a hub type federated search of sources in the Cantus Index, then we might have that connection with you two there. But at this point, we're just looking for the individual chants that we will connect you through in the Cantus Index. So then any connection, I guess, with RISM might be from your Musicat site just on its own, because our connection with RISM is through the Cantus database, which is our manuscript database holdings. So the equivalent to that would be for you to do a connection with RISM right through the Musicat directly. But we can talk further.
Yeah. Right.
Thank you. Having the same metadata, same standards in the sources, I think is like the first thing, because they won't talk to one another unless they know what language they're speaking, basically, right? So if we have our Sigla in a format that RISM can understand, then they can get ours and it can make sense. So, and we, a lot of that work that had to be done was manual, and it was a lot of decisions about what to call things, and then the back end could be connected that way. So maybe that would be the first step on the Musicat side, to think about kind of connecting back ends together. I hope that helps a little bit. And if I've misspoken, Andrew and Dylan, you'll fill in.
Laurent, you wanted to say something?
Laurent, yeah, sure.
Yes, just very briefly. I think it's important that things go in the right place when we have different databases like that, and then it's to decide if the source description should be more in Cantus or in RISM. That can be discussed. With DIAM, we had to deal with a few duplicates because we had a few sources in RISM that were also in DIAM. The nice thing with this solution that Andrew presented, which is dynamic, means that that are basically updated every week. The mapping, if there are some duplicates, it can be done gradually. So we try to link sources when they are the same in DIAM and RISM. But because it's not an import, we can start with what we have. Of course, if they've not been mapped, they're going to appear twice in RISM Online, but eventually they can be mapped. There is a link between the two, and they will appear only once in RISM Online, which is one important thing also with this solution. So not to show duplicates when we know these are duplicates. Of course, if we don't know, then it's difficult. So, but of course, avoiding duplicate in the first place is probably the best thing to do, and discussing on where to put things and agreeing together is the best thing to do.
Other questions? I have a couple questions. So when you're talking about, I guess it's mostly Andrew, this question. When you talk about institutional identifications, do you have LinkedIn links to Wikidata IDs? Link Music is centered around Wikidata, so I'm just wondering if you guys, I'm sure you thought about it. What's the deal with the RISM institutional ID and Wikidata IDs?
The short answer is that yes, we have some Wikidata IDs in some institution records. So those have to be added manually.
Yes. You don't have, okay.
But that's the short answer.
Okay,
The
long
long
answer.
answer is in Wikidata, there is a specific property. There's two properties, in fact. P5504 is the institution, the RISM institution identifier, and that is signals that an institution in Wikidata has a RISM identifier, and that's for sources, people, and institutions.
Right.
The second one is specifically for RISM Sigla, and that's only for institutions. I can't remember the property number for that one. But you can add a RISM Siglum to an institution record, and it will link back to RISM Online using the resolver in Wikidata. So we link out to Wikidata whenever we can, and we link in from Wikidata whenever we can. And hopefully, I haven't done enough Sparkle queries to figure out if one maps to the other,
Okay.
but yeah, it's on our radar, and we do stuff with that. But yeah.
Laurent, did you want to say something?
Yeah, I think actually, while we're hanging a little bit on some VIAF updates on that. Andrew, I think actually all the RISM institutions went into Wikidata through VIAF. So I think probably most of the links from Wikidata to us is there. We still need to, update them on the other directions, but we waiting on VIAF to do an update. And once this is done, we can probably then make sure that
that was done a few years ago, though. So
sure.
I think,
yeah.
Okay,
yeah.
I mean that's something we can do as linked music. We can put people to manually link RISM institution to Wikidata ID if we need to create them manually. So we can talk about that. Then it'll be simpler for everybody else in their Cantus index databases, just use that, then hopefully that's the only thing they have to do. Yeah.
That's also an option, I think, in that identifiers, that institution identifiers table. While we were in there, we added the ability to link
Oh,
Cantus database institution to a Wikidata entry. And if it's not there, then it can be added really quickly. So
great.
It is.
Great.
okay, yeah.
Cool.
Job done.
Done. Great.
Yeah. Future past me likes future me.
All right. Other questions? On your slide 23, you don't have to put them up unless it's handy. I think it was Dylan, you talked about digital reconstruction. I'm not sure if everybody understood what that meant. I've always called it, this is just a suggestion, a virtual manuscript. So is that what you meant? Was it Dylan? You put digital construction? That's what you
Yeah,
mean, right?
yeah.
Wording fragments, manuscripts torn apart. It's in one page, one folio is in one institution, another one, several other ones in another institution. That's the digital reconstruction, right? Is that
That's
what you meant?
correct. Yes,
Right.
yes.
Yeah. Can we call it Julia?
In DIAM, we have virtual manuscripts because we've got quite a lot of things that are dispersed around libraries. So we created a record. We have a RISM siglum for DIAM. So it's GBO DIAM, and then it calls itself this virtual manuscript. And you can't just give it one shelf mark because, of course, it's probably made up of 20.
Right.
But we also reserve the title digital reconstruction for manuscripts where we've repaired them digitally. So, I mean, particularly, I'm thinking about the Sadler Park books, which were completely unreadable. They are in the Bodleian Library, but we have them in ODIAM as a digital reconstruction. And the manuscripts are complete where they are, but the reconstruction is actually digital work that we've done on the images. So there's quite a distinct difference.
Right. So all I'm trying to do is come up with, nomenclature that we can use consistently, and it's easy, understandable. So I'm suggesting we use the term virtual manuscript when we're just combining, separated what was originally a manuscript. I'm sure things get complicated. I understand, Anna, but that might be a better word to use in general. Just say virtual manuscript. And now Julia has added digital reconstruction where when images are reconstructed or restored, I guess. Yeah.
Well, we don't use
idea.
the word restored because it has semantic issues.
Okay.
It has really, because you can't really restore it because you don't know how it originally looked. So it's a reconstruction, a digital reconstruction.
Cool.
I saw Kate Steiner sort of raising her physical hand, so maybe we can see. Yeah.
Hi, thanks for this presentation. I was curious if you could say more about how the Cantus database information catalog is included in a search in RISM. So you searched antiphonor. Is that just searching the title? Is it also searching the description? And especially interested in are the incipits, the musical incipits, included in a RISM search?
So I'd have to look at the specifics, but we do. So the mechanism is we get the database, we convert it into Solr, which is a big search index, and then when you do a keyword search, it searches across a number of fields, and certainly the shelf mark, the description, a few other things I can't remember off the top of my head are included. But the incipits or the full piano isn't yet. The nice thing about the way that we're doing it is that when I get some time, or when I sort of have another bit of work that I'm doing, that we can progressively enhance the search with new information from Cantus, because we're getting the full Cantus database, and what we're searching on now is only sort of limited by the amount of work we can put in to make it reliable. If somebody comes to us and says, we'd like to be able to search every chant title, or we'd like to be able to do it by the Cantus ID or something, then we would take that and then we would add that. We'd sort of have an engineering decision to make, but we could add that information in as possible. We have talked about doing in-chippets, or the chant search. The underlying infrastructure for doing notation search is quite a bit more difficult. We I shouldn't say this, but we have a kind of a working hypothesis sort of in our back pockets, but it's not reliable yet. Is the long and short of it. So we need to do more work, and that just needs more time.
So just to clarify, so if the word antiphonal is in the description, it'll find it, right? Correct, Andrew?
Yes.
Yeah.
And if it's in the shelf mark, if you put in a shelf mark, it should find that coming from Cantus. Yeah, and there's a number of other, I can't remember, like there's a format field and a few other descriptors that we also index.
Okay, so we're running out of time. So Jennifer, was there something you wanted to say as closing?
No, just thank you to you, Ichiro, and to Dylan and Andrew for really great presentations, of course, for all the work that they did too, but also for describing that work succinctly. I think it was really helpful for everybody to hear about, what's involved in the back end and actually trying to make these kinds of integrations happen. And of course, it's amazing that RISM agreed to do this. So also thank you to Laurent. Maybe we can all give a little round of applause for our speakers. So thank you, everybody.
So in the 2 minutes remaining, maybe Dylan, you can do your demo, and people who needs to leave can leave. The meeting is officially over, but
I also saw a hand.
I'd like to hear Dylan sing it, please.
Oh no.
Okay,
but
do the
I also saw a
demo.
hand from Virginia and Anna.
Yeah, no, go ahead, do the demo.
Do the demo.
Yeah, the meeting is over. Like,
okay, the meeting is over.
Yeah, I mean, people can ask questions over email, whatever. They know where to find you.
So here we have this you're familiar with the list of sources, and in Cantus database, and so we now have this. It's you've probably seen it because it's been live since November, but we now have this column that's city and holding institution, and if you go to an individual source record, here's this. We had a copy of this in the presentation, but here's this, this source title and this Cantus siglum that we're designating as a Cantus siglum, where it's drawing from those two different fields, the holding institution information and the shelf mark information, and putting it together into these two different formats. But then also we have the holding institution field, and that links now. So this is something that we can, we couldn't have done before, is take you to a page where all of the sources, the cluster Neuberg sources, are on a single page. And as you can see, we've here got these two different sub databases, the Cantus database and the sequence database. But then as I mean, I don't think probably ContourIS will have a source from here, but if they did, then that could all of those different sub databases could show up here too. And then this is the whole bidirectional linking. So then here's a link to see this institution in RISM Online. So you want to know what other sources that aren't in Cantus database but that are in RISM Online. I don't know if there are any for this particular source, but yes, okay, 327. So both Cantus sources, DIAM sources, and then other RISM sources are all more easily linked. And then I guess we're 1 minute over time, but this is also a relatively new search that we could do by pulling out the fragmented information from the Cantus siglum, as I mentioned. Now you can search for just fragments, and so a little bit of that is shown here, how we change the display. So quick and dirty.
Thank you very much, Dylan. Okay, thank you all, and have a nice weekend.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Bye.